The sun had barely peeked over the horizon when Jake opened his eyes. The sound of roosters crowing and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the small tin-roofed house. At 17, Jake already carried the weight of a grown man on his shoulders. He got up from the bed he shared with his younger sister, Sarah, and headed to the kitchen. "Good morning, Mom," he mumbled while rubbing his eyes. Linda, a woman with a tired appearance but a warm smile, handed him a cup of coffee. "Good morning, sweetie. Ready for another day?" Jake nodded silently. Each day was a struggle, but they had no other choice. He took a sip of coffee and bit into a piece of stale bread. His gaze drifted to the horizon through the broken window, beyond the dusty streets of the neighborhood. "I have to go to Mr. Thompson's construction site today," Jake said. "I promised to help him carry some materials." Linda frowned. "Are they going to pay you?" "I don't know, Mom, but Mr. Thompson has always been good to us. I can't say no." His mother sighed but didn't say anything more. She understood her son's kindness, although sometimes she wished he would be more practical. Jake left the house in his work clothes, worn and stained with cement. The neighborhood was beginning to wake up, with street vendors preparing their stalls and children running to school. He had dropped out of school a while ago to help his family, a decision that still weighed on him. He walked for half an hour until he reached Mr. Thompson's house, a half-finished construction in a slightly more affluent area. The old man was waiting for him at the entrance with a kind smile on his wrinkled face. "Jake, my boy, good to see you came," exclaimed Mr. Thompson. "Good morning, Mr. Thompson. What do we need to do today?" "We need to move some cement bags and some beams. It's too much work for an old man like me." Jake nodded and got to work. The sun climbed in the sky as he carried heavy bags and metal beams. Sweat soaked his shirt, but he didn't stop. Thompson watched him with a mixture of admiration and pity. "You're a good boy, Jake," the old man said during a break. "You remind me of my son Alex when he was young. Now he's a businessman. I hardly ever see him." Jake listened attentively. He had heard about Mr. Thompson's son, but had never seen him. He wondered what it would be like to have a life like that, so different from his own. At noon, when the sun was at its highest point, a luxurious car stopped in front of the house. Jake stopped working, surprised by the sight of the vehicle that was completely out of place in the surroundings. A man in his 40s, dressed in an impeccable suit, got out of the car. It was Alex, Mr. Thompson's son. The old man ran to hug his son with tears in his eyes. "Dad, what are you doing working in this heat?" Alex asked, concerned. "I'm not working, son." "Jake is helping me," Thompson replied, pointing to the young man. Alex looked Jake up and down, noticing his worn clothes and calloused hands. Something in the boy's gaze caught his attention. "Thank you for helping my father," Alex said. Extending his hand, Jake shook it, feeling the smoothness of the man's skin in contrast to his own rough hands. "It's nothing, sir. Your father has always been good to my family." Alex nodded, thoughtful. Then, as if a sudden idea had struck him, he asked, "Would you like a different job, Jake? Something that could change your life?" Jake blinked, confused. "A job? What kind of job?" "In my IT company. You don't need experience, just a willingness to learn and work hard. What do you say?" The young man was left speechless. Was this real? An opportunity like this, falling from the sky? I don't know what to say," Jake stammered. "Say yes, boy," Mr. Thompson interjected, with a smile from ear to ear. "This is the opportunity of a lifetime." Jake looked at Mr. Thompson, then at Alex, and finally at the horizon, towards his neighborhood. His mind was a whirlwind of emotions and thoughts. Could he really change his life? What would his mother say, and Sarah? "I need to think about it," he finally said. "I need to talk to my family." Alex nodded, understanding. "Of course. Take my card. Call me when you've made a decision." Jake took the card with trembling hands. He felt like he was on the edge of a precipice, about to jump into the unknown. That night, as he walked back home, Alex's card weighed in his pocket as if it were made of lead. Jake knew that this decision would not only affect him, but his entire family. Was he ready to take this leap? Could he adapt to a world so different from his own? With each step, the future opened up before him, full of possibilities and dangers. Jake didn't know it. But that simple act of kindness towards old Mr. Thompson had set in motion a series of events that would change his life forever. When he arrived home, he paused at the door. He took a deep breath, knowing that the conversation he was about to have with his family could be the first step towards a completely new future. With determination, he turned the doorknob and entered, ready to face whatever came. The small Rodriguez house buzzed with unusual activity that night. Linda, with eyes bright with excitement and worry, couldn't stop moving from one side of the kitchen to the other, preparing dinner while her mind wandered over the news that Jake had just shared. "Are you sure about this, sweetie?" she asked for the umpteenth time while serving beans on chipped plates. Jake, sitting at the table with Sarah, sighed deeply. "I'm not sure of anything, Mom, but what other choice do we have?" Sarah, who until that moment had remained silent, spoke up with a trembling voice. "But Jake, what if it's a trap? What if that rich man just wants to take advantage of you?" "Don't talk nonsense, Sarah," Linda scolded her, although deep down she shared the same fears. "Mr. Thompson knows those people. They wouldn't harm us." Jake looked at Alex's card, which he had placed in the center of the table as if it were a talisman. His thoughts were a whirlwind of hopes and fears. On one hand, the opportunity to escape poverty, to give his family a better life. On the other, the fear of the unknown, of not being up to the task. "I have to try," he finally said, with a determination that surprised even himself. "If it doesn't work out, I can always go back to construction, but if it does, my son," Linda completed, sitting next to him and taking his hand, "you could have the life we always dreamed of for you." The decision was made. That same night, with trembling hands, Jake dialed the number on the card. Alex's voice on the other end of the line sounded warm and enthusiastic. "Jake, I'm glad you called. Have you made a decision?" "Yes, sir," Jake replied, swallowing hard. "I accept your offer. I want to work in your company." "Excellent," Alex exclaimed. "We expect you tomorrow at 9 at the address on the card. And Jake, dress as best you can." As he hung up, Jake felt as if the weight of the world rested on his shoulders. He looked around at the small house that had been his world for 17 years. Was he really prepared to leave it behind? The next morning came too soon. Jake woke up before dawn. Nervous and excited, he put on the only white shirt he had, a bit tight and missing a button, and the least worn pants he could find. Linda, with teary eyes, fixed his collar and gave him a kiss on the cheek. "I'm proud of you." "My boy," she whispered. "You're going to do great things." The bus ride to the city center was like entering another world. The buildings grew taller, the streets cleaner, the people more elegant. Jake felt like a stranger, aware of every glance that fell on his worn clothes and dirty shoes. Finally, he arrived at the imposing glass building where Alex's company was located. With his heart beating 1,000 miles an hour, he approached the receptionist. "Good morning," he said with a trembling voice. "I'm Jake Rodriguez. I'm here to see Mr. Alex." The receptionist looked at him with a mixture of surprise and disdain. "Do you have an appointment?" I think so. He's expecting me." After a tense phone call, the receptionist told him to go up to the 20th floor. The elevator, with its mirrors and soft music, made Jake feel even more out of place. As the doors opened, he found himself in a world of modern offices, gleaming computers, and people dressed in elegant suits. Alex was waiting for him with a smile. "Jake, welcome to your new home," he exclaimed, giving him a pat on the back that almost made him stumble. The following hours were a whirlwind of introductions, explanations, and signing documents that Jake barely understood. They assigned him a desk, a computer, and a pile of manuals to study. "Don't worry," Alex told him before leaving. "John will be your mentor. He also came from a humble neighborhood, so he'll understand what you're going through." John turned out to be a man in his 30s, with a kind smile and understanding look. "Don't get overwhelmed," he told Jake when he saw him struggling with the computer mouse. "I was in your place years ago. It takes time, but you'll get it." As the day progressed, Jake felt increasingly overwhelmed. The technical terms, the procedures, the expectations, everything seemed to be beyond his comprehension. During lunch, he hid in the bathroom, fighting back tears of frustration and fear. "What am I doing here?" he asked himself, looking at his reflection in the mirror. I don't belong in this place. But then he remembered his mother, Sarah, the tin-roofed house, the endless days under the sun in construction. He couldn't give up. Not now. With renewed determination, he returned to his desk. Hour after hour, he struggled with each concept, each program, each task assigned to him. John, patient and understanding, guided him step by step. At the end of the day, exhausted but with a spark of hope in his heart, Jake was preparing to leave when Alex appeared again. "How was your first day?" he asked with genuine interest. Jake hesitated a moment before answering. "Difficult," he admitted. "But I'm willing to learn, sir. I promise I won't disappoint you." Alex smiled, a smile that seemed to hide something more than simple satisfaction. "I'm sure you won't, Jake. I have big plans for you." As Jake left the building, feeling the weight of the day in every muscle of his body, he couldn't help but wonder what those words meant exactly. What plans did Alex have? And was he really prepared to face them? The way back home was a brutal contrast to the opulence he had just left behind. Each block that brought him closer to his neighborhood was a reminder of where he came from and how much he had to fight to get ahead. When he arrived home, he found his family anxiously waiting for him. Linda hugged him tightly, as if afraid he might disappear. "How did it go, my boy?" she asked, scrutinizing his face for answers. Jake looked at his mother, then at Sarah, who was watching him with a mixture of curiosity and concern. He took a deep breath before answering. "It was different," he finally said, "but I think I can do it. I have to do it." That night, lying in his bed, Jake stared at the cracked ceiling of his room. The contrast between his reality and the world he had entered today was overwhelming, but amid his doubts and fears, a spark of determination burned in his chest. Tomorrow would be another day, another opportunity to learn, to grow, to change his destiny and that of his family. With that thought, he closed his eyes, letting sleep carry him towards an uncertain but promising future. The weeks flew by for Jake. Each day was a challenge, an emotional roller coaster that took him from the deepest frustration to moments of triumph that made him feel capable of conquering the world. At the office, Jake struggled to keep up with the frantic pace and technical demands of his new job. He spent extra hours studying manuals and practicing on the computer, determined not to disappoint Alex or John, his mentor, who had placed so much faith in him. One morning, as Jake worked at his desk, focused on a particularly complex task, Alex approached with a determined step. "Jake, I need you to participate in this afternoon's meeting with the investors," he announced without preamble. The young man felt the ground open beneath his feet. "Me? But sir, I've only been here a few weeks. I don't think I'm prepared to—" Alex interrupted him with a gesture. "We need new blood, fresh ideas. I trust you, Jake. Don't disappoint me." With those words, Alex walked away, leaving Jake immersed in a sea of doubts and anxiety. John, who had witnessed the scene, approached with a concerned expression. "Don't worry, kid," he said, putting a hand on his shoulder. "I'll be with you in the meeting. Just be yourself and everything will be fine." The hours until the meeting passed in a blur. Jake tried to prepare as best he could, reviewing projects and figures until his head was spinning. When the moment arrived, he entered the boardroom with shaky legs, feeling that all eyes were fixed on him. The meeting began with Alex presenting the company's latest results. Jake listened attentively, trying to follow the conversation full of technical and financial terms that he still didn't fully master. Then, suddenly, Alex turned to him. "Jake, why don't you share your vision on the new digital inclusion project?" The silence that followed was deafening. Jake felt his mouth go dry as all the executives and investors looked at him expectantly. For a moment, he thought about repeating the phrases he had memorized from the reports, but something inside him stopped him. Instead, he began to speak from the heart. He told them about his neighborhood, about young people like him who had never had access to a computer. He talked about the digital divide and how it was keeping entire communities in poverty. And finally, with a passion that surprised even himself, he presented his vision of how the company could make a real difference in those lives. When he finished, silence filled the room again. Jake swallowed hard, fearing he had made a terrible mistake. But then, one of the investors began to applaud, and soon the whole room joined in. "Brilliant," Alex exclaimed, with a smile from ear to ear. This is exactly what we needed to hear." The rest of the meeting passed in a whirlwind of congratulations and enthusiastic discussions about how to implement Jake's ideas. When he finally left the room, he felt as if he were floating. John caught up with him in the hallway. "You did it, kid," he said, patting him on the back. "I knew you had potential." Success in the meeting marked a turning point for Jake. Suddenly, doors began to open. Alex invited him to more meetings, assigned him more important projects. Jake felt that he was finally finding his place in this new world. However, while his professional life flourished, things at home began to get complicated. Linda, although proud of her son's achievements, couldn't help but feel increasingly distant from him. One night during dinner, Linda could no longer contain her feelings. "I hardly see you, son," she said with a broken voice. "You work late. On weekends, aren't we important to you anymore?" Jake was stunned. "Mum, how can you say that? Everything I do is for you." "For us," Sarah intervened, with a bitter tone that Jake had never heard in her. "You're forgetting where you come from, Jake. You don't even talk like us anymore." Her sister's words hit him like a punch. Was it true? Was he changing so much? "It's not like that," he protested weakly. "I'm still the same." But even as he said it, a part of him knew it wasn't entirely true. His world had expanded. His horizons had broadened. He was no longer the same young man who carried bricks under the scorching sun. That night, lying in his bed, Jake couldn't sleep. His mother's and sister's words echoed in his mind, mixing with the praise from Alex and the investors. He felt like he was being torn between two worlds, unable to fully belong to either. The next day, at the office, Jake was distracted, his mind still on the previous night's discussion. Alex noticed and called him to his office. "Everything okay, Jake?" he asked, with genuine concern in his voice. Jake hesitated a moment before answering. "It's complicated, sir. Sometimes I feel like I don't fit in anywhere. Not here, not at home." Alex looked at him thoughtfully. "I understand you more than you think, Jake. I also come from a humble family. Success can be a heavy burden sometimes." Jake looked at him surprised. He had never imagined that Alex, with his impeccable suit and unshakable confidence, could have faced similar struggles. "How did you do it?" he asked. "How did you manage to balance everything?" Alex smiled sadly. "I didn't always manage. I made mistakes, lost important connections. But I learned that success means nothing if you can't share it with the people you love." His words resonated deeply with Jake. He realized that he had been so focused on climbing up, on proving himself, that he had neglected what was most important, his family, his roots. "Thank you, sir," Jake said, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. "I think I know what I have to do." That afternoon, Jake left the office early. On the way home, he stopped at a store and bought ingredients to make his mother's favorite meal. When he arrived, he found Linda and Sarah surprised to see him so early. "Did something happen, son?" Linda asked, worried. Jake smiled, feeling a warmth in his chest that he had missed. "Nothing bad, Mum. I just wanted to spend time with you. How about we cook together?" As they prepared dinner, laughing and remembering old stories, Jake felt that he was finally finding a balance. He didn't have to choose between his two worlds. He could be a bridge between them, bringing the best of each to the other. That night, as he went to bed, Jake realized that his real challenge was not just to succeed at work. It was to maintain his identity, his values, his connection to his roots, while navigating this new world of opportunities. With that resolution in mind, he closed his eyes, ready to face whatever came. He knew the road wouldn't be easy, but he was determined to walk it without losing sight of what really mattered. The months flew by, and with them, Jake transformed. He was no longer the shy and insecure young man who had first entered the glass building. Now he walked confidently through the company's hallways, his mind full of innovative ideas and his heart divided between two worlds. One spring morning, Alex summoned Jake to his office. The young man entered, intrigued by his boss's serious expression. "Jake, I have important news," Alex began, inviting him to sit down. "The company is expanding its international operations." We need someone to lead a crucial project in Silicon Valley. Jake's heart skipped a beat. Silicon Valley, the United States. It was a dream he had never dared to have. And I want you to lead it, Alex concluded. Jake was speechless for a moment. I don't know what to say, sir. It's an incredible opportunity, but you're thinking about your family, Alex completed with an understanding smile. I get it. That's why I'm giving you time to think about it. You have a week to decide. That night, Jake arrived home with his mind in a whirlwind. Dinner passed in silence, with Linda and Sarah exchanging worried glances. What's wrong? Son? Linda finally asked. You're very quiet. Jake took a deep breath before speaking. They offered me a project in the United States, in Silicon Valley. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah was the first to break it. Are you going to leave? She asked, with a mixture of pride and sadness in her voice. I don't know, Jake answered honestly. It's a great opportunity, but I don't want to leave you alone. Linda took her son's hand. My boy, you've worked so hard for this. You can't turn it down because of us. But Mom, who will take care of you if I leave? We can take care of ourselves, Sarah interjected, surprising everyone. We're not the same as we were a few months ago, Jake. You've taught us to dream big. The following days were an emotional roller coaster for Jake. On one hand, the excitement of an opportunity that could change his life forever. On the other, the fear of moving away from everything he knew, from the people he loved. At work, John noticed his internal conflict. What's worrying you, huh, kid? He asked one day during lunch. Jake told him about the offer and his doubts. John listened attentively before speaking. You know, when I had my first opportunity to travel for work, I also hesitated, he confessed. But my family told me something I never forgot. If you fly high, we all fly with you. Those words resonated deeply with Jake. That night, he made his decision. He gathered his family in the small living room of their house. I've decided to accept the project, he announced, with a mixture of excitement and nervousness in his voice. To his surprise, Linda and Sarah hugged him tightly. We're proud of you, his mother said, with tears in her eyes. You're going to do great things. The following days were a whirlwind of preparations. Jake immersed himself in work, determined to leave everything in order before his departure. At home, Linda and Sarah helped him pack, filling his suitcase not only with clothes but also with memories and love. The night before his trip, Jake couldn't sleep. He got up silently and went out to the small backyard. He looked at the stars, the same ones he had contemplated so many times as a child, dreaming of a better future. Sarah found him there. Nervous? She asked, sitting beside him. Jake nodded. I'm scared, Sarah. What if I'm not good enough? What if I disappoint you? His sister looked at him with a maturity that surprised him. Jake, you've already given us more than we ever dreamed of. No matter what happens there, you'll always be a hero to us. Those words gave Jake the strength he needed. The next morning, he said goodbye to his family at the airport, with promises of frequent calls and visits as soon as possible. As the plane took off, Jake looked out the window, watching as his neighborhood, his city, his known world became smaller and smaller. A mixture of excitement and nostalgia overwhelmed him. He was leaving behind everything he knew, but he carried with him the love and support of his family. The first days in Silicon Valley were overwhelming. The frantic pace, cutting-edge technology, the language. Everything was a constant challenge. But Jake was determined to succeed, not only for himself but for all those who had believed in him. One afternoon, while working on his new project, he received a video call from his family. Seeing their smiling faces on the screen gave him a new injection of energy and determination. How's everything going, son? Linda asked, her face full of pride. It's hard, Mom, Jake admitted, but I'm learning a lot. And everything I learn thinking of you, of how I can use it to help our community. Sarah smiled. You're already doing it, Jake. Your story has spread through the neighborhood. Now all the kids want to study computer science. Those words made Jake realize something important. His journey wasn't just personal, it was a beacon of hope for his entire community. He was opening doors not only for himself, but for all those who would come after. With renewed determination, Jake immersed himself in his work. Every challenge, every obstacle, he faced with the strength that came from knowing he wasn't alone in this. He had his family, his community, supporting him from afar. One night, while working late at the office, Alex surprised him with an unexpected visit. "How's everything going, Jake?" he asked, sitting across from him. "It's intense, sir," Jake answered honestly, "but I'm giving it my best." Alex smiled. "I know, and you're exceeding all our expectations. But remember, success isn't measured only in professional achievements. How's your heart?" The question took Jake by surprise. He realized that, in his eagerness to succeed, he had been neglecting his emotional well-being. "Did I miss my family?" he admitted. "Sometimes I wonder if I made the right decision." Alex nodded understandingly. "The path to success is often lonely, Jake. But remember why you're here. Not just for you, but for them. For your community. You're a bridge between two worlds, and that makes you invaluable." Those words resonated deeply with Jake. He realized that his journey was bigger than himself. It was an opportunity to build bridges, to open paths for others like him. That night, as he looked at the lights of Silicon Valley from his apartment window, Jake felt a mixture of nostalgia and hope. He was far from home, but each step he took brought him closer to his dreams and a better future for all those he loved. With that resolution in mind, he prepared to face a new day, ready to conquer any challenge that came his way. Because now he understood that his success wasn't just his own, it was the success of all those who had believed in him. The months in Silicon Valley turned into a year, and Jake found himself transformed not only professionally, but personally. His English was now peppered with technical terms, and his confidence had grown along with his skills. However, the distance from his home and family weighed more and more on his heart. One spring morning, as Jake was checking his emails, a message from Alex caught his attention. "Digital Inclusion Project in Detroit. We need your leadership." Jake's heart skipped a beat, an opportunity to return home and at the same time apply everything he had learned. It seemed too good to be true. Without wasting time, Jake called Alex. "Is it true?" he asked, unable to contain his excitement. "Do you really want me to lead the project in Detroit?" Alex's warm laughter resonated through the phone. "That's right, Jake. You've proven your worth here, and I think you're the perfect person to bring innovation back home. But before you get too excited, you should know it won't be easy. You'll be facing unique challenges." Jake nodded, although Alex couldn't see him. "I'm ready, sir. I've been waiting for an opportunity like this." The following days were a whirlwind of preparations. Jake immersed himself in planning the project, determined to make a real difference in his community. Sleepless nights and long conversations with community development experts became his new normal. Finally, the day of his return to Detroit arrived. As the plane descended over Detroit, Jake felt a mix of emotions: excitement, nervousness, and a deep sense of responsibility. At the airport, Linda and Sarah were waiting for him with tears of joy. The hugs were long and emotional, full of unspoken words and unconditional love. "My boy," Linda whispered, caressing Jake's face. "You've grown so much." Sarah, now a young woman, looked at him with pride. "Welcome home, brother. We have so much to tell you." The journey back to his old neighborhood was a surreal experience for Jake. The streets that once seemed so familiar now looked different through his experienced eyes. He noticed problems and opportunities that had previously gone unnoticed. When they arrived at their old house, Jake was surprised to see that little had changed. However, upon entering, he noticed small details: a computer in the corner, English books on the table, motivational posters on the walls. "What's all this?" he asked. Moved. Linda smiled. "Your success inspired us, son. Sarah has been taking English and computer classes, and I've been learning to use the internet to sell my crafts." Jake was speechless. His journey had not only transformed him, but had triggered a change in his entire family. The following days were a whirlwind of meetings and preparations for the launch of the Digital Inclusion Project. Jake toured his old neighborhood, talking to neighbors and community leaders, listening to their needs and challenges. One afternoon, while walking through the dusty streets, he ran into his old friend Mike. "Jake," Mike exclaimed, giving him a hug. "Look at you, a real executive." Jake smiled, but noticed a hint of bitterness in his friend's voice. Jazz, how have you been, Mike? Well, you know, Mike replied, shrugging. Some of us have to stay here, struggling day by day. Mike's words hit Jake like a punch. He realized that, despite his good intentions, for some in his community, he was now a stranger, someone who had escaped from the reality they faced every day. That night, Jake couldn't sleep. He sat in the small backyard of his house, contemplating the stars as he used to do as a child. Sarah found him there. "What's wrong, brother?" she asked, sitting next to him. Jake sighed. "I don't know if I can do this, Sarah. I feel disconnected, as if I no longer belong here." Sarah looked at him with wisdom beyond her years. "Jake, you are the bridge. You've seen both worlds, and that gives you a unique perspective. You don't have to choose between being from here or there. You can be from both places." Her words resonated deeply with Jake. He realized that his challenge was not to fit perfectly into either of the two worlds, but to be the link between them. With renewed determination, Jake immersed himself in the project. He organized training workshops, managed the installation of community computer centers, and worked tirelessly to adapt technology to local needs. One day, while supervising the installation of computers at the local school, Jake ran into his former teacher, Mr. Davis. "Tide Gasmain, my boy," the teacher said with a proud smile. "I always knew you'd go far." Jake smiled, but then his expression turned serious. "Mr. Davis, I need your help. I want this project to succeed, but I'm worried that people will see it as something imposed from the outside." Mr. Davis nodded understandingly. "The key is in the community, Jake. Don't just give them technology. Teach them to use it to solve their own problems." Inspired by these words, Jake reorganized the project. Instead of simply installing technology, he began organizing community work groups. Young people and adults gathered to discuss how technology could address local challenges, from education to employment and health. Little by little, the initial skepticism transformed into enthusiasm. Jake saw how his community began to take ownership of the project, adapting it to their needs and dreams. One afternoon, as Jake was working on his laptop in his house's yard, he heard laughter and excited voices coming from the street. When he looked out, he saw a group of neighborhood children gathered around Mike, who was showing them how to use a tablet. "Mike?" Jake asked, surprised. His friend looked at him with a shy smile. "Well, I thought if you can't beat them, join them. I've been taking classes at the community center." Jake felt his heart fill with joy and pride. This was the real success, seeing his community empowering themselves, using technology as a tool for change. That night, during the family dinner, Jake looked around with a new perspective. His mother talking excitedly about her online sales, Sarah discussing her plans to study engineering, and himself, a bridge between two worlds, working to create opportunities for others. "You know something, Mom," Jake said, taking Linda's hand. "I think I finally understand what success means. It's not just about personal achievements, but about elevating the entire community with you." Linda smiled, and with tears in her eyes, "I always knew it, my boy. I always knew you would do great things, not just for yourself, but for all of us." As the night progressed, Jake realized that he had found his true purpose. He wasn't just a successful executive or a son who had escaped poverty. He was an agent of change, a bridge between worlds, working to create a better future for his community and for many others like him. With that certainty in his heart, Jake prepared to face the challenges that would come. He knew the road wouldn't be easy, but now he had something he didn't have when he started his journey: the strength of his roots and the power of his wings. Jake's digital inclusion project was in full swing. The community centers buzzed with activity, filled with young people and adults learning to use technology to improve their lives. However, as often happens when things are going too well, a storm was brewing on the horizon. One morning, as Jake was reviewing project reports in his makeshift office at the community center, he received an unexpected call from Alex. "Jake, we have a problem." Alex's voice sounded tense. "Accusations of corruption have emerged in the project. Some local politicians are saying we're favoring certain families and excluding others." Jake's world wobbled. "But that's not true," he protested. "We've been completely transparent in everything." "I know," Alex replied. "Oh, but perception is important. We need to handle this carefully. I'm coming over there." The following days were a whirlwind of crisis meetings and press statements. Jake found himself defending not only the project, but his own integrity. The suspicious glances from some community members hurt more than any accusation in the media. One afternoon, while walking through the neighborhood, feeling exhausted and demoralized, he ran into Mrs. Johnson, an elderly woman who had been one of the first to support the project. "Jake, honey," she called from her porch, "come, sit with me for a while." Jake sat next to her, grateful for a moment of calm in the midst of the storm. "Don't let them discourage you," Mrs. Johnson said, patting his hand. "We all know here what you've done for us. Lies have short legs." Her words were a balm for Jake's wounded soul. They reminded him of why he had started this project in the first place. That night, during the family dinner, Jake shared his concerns. "I don't understand," he said, frustrated. "We've done everything possible to help the community. Why would anyone want to sabotage that?" Linda looked at him with understanding. "Son, sometimes progress scares those who benefit from the status quo. Not everyone wants to see our people empowered." Sarah, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly spoke up. "Jake, there's something you should know," she said, her voice trembling. "I've been doing some investigating. I think I know who's behind these accusations." Jake looked at her, surprised. "What? Who?" It's Uncle Robert," Sarah replied, referring to Linda's brother, a man Jake barely knew. "He has connections with some local politicians. I think he's jealous of your success and wants to take control of the project." The revelation fell like a bomb at the table. Linda put her hands to her mouth, horrified. Jake was left speechless, feeling a mixture of betrayal and anger. "How did you know?" he finally asked. Sarah lowered her gaze. "I've been volunteering at the community center. I overheard some conversations, saw some messages. I'm sorry. I should have told you sooner." Jake got up from the table, needing a moment to process this information. He went out to the yard, looking at the stars as he used to do when he needed to think. Minutes later, he felt a presence beside him. It was Linda. "My boy," she said softly. "I know this is difficult. Robert was always complicated. But don't let this divert you from your path." Jake looked at his mother, seeing in her eyes the strength that had always inspired him. "What should I do?" "Mum." "Face them," Linda replied firmly. "With the truth and with your work. Show them that what you're doing is bigger than any political game." Inspired by his mother's words and his sister's courage, Jake made a decision. The next day, he called a community assembly in the neighborhood's central square. With Alex by his side and his family in the front row, Jake stood before hundreds of people, many of whom had watched him grow up. "I know you've heard rumors and accusations," he began, "but today I want to show you the truth, not with words, but with facts." Over the next few hours, Jake presented testimonies from people whose lives had been transformed by the project. Young people who now had jobs in technology, single mothers who had started online businesses, elderly people who could connect with distant relatives. "This project isn't mine," Jake declared passionately. "It's ours, all of ours, and we won't let the ambition of a few destroy it." The crowd erupted in applause. Even some of the local politicians who had been skeptical began to nod in approval. But the most impactful moment was yet to come. From among the crowd, a familiar figure emerged. "Uncle Robert." "Jake," he said, his voice broken with emotion. I was wrong. I let envy and ambition blind me. But seeing all this, everything you've accomplished, I'm proud of you, nephew." The silence that followed was deafening. Jake looked at his uncle, seeing genuine regret in his eyes. At that moment, he had to make a crucial decision, forgive or reject. Taking a deep breath, Jake extended his hand. "We all make mistakes, Uncle. The important thing is to recognize them and work together to fix them." The hug that followed was more than a family reconciliation. It was a symbol of unity for the entire community. That night, as the family celebrated at home, Alex took Jake aside. "What you did today," he said with admiration in his voice, "was true leadership. You've grown more than I imagined." Jake smiled, feeling a mixture of pride and humility. "I learned from the best, Alex." And from my family, from this community, everyone has taught me something. As the night progressed, Jake reflected on the path he had traveled, from that insecure young man who carried bricks to the leader he had become. But he knew his journey wasn't over. In fact, he felt it was just beginning. With the crisis overcome and the community more united than ever, Jake now faced new challenges and opportunities. The Digital Inclusion Project had attracted national attention, and proposals were emerging to expand it to other communities. As he looked at his family and friends gathered, Jake felt a deep gratitude. Every obstacle, every doubt, every moment of despair had led him to this point. And although the future was uncertain, he knew that with the support of his community and the strength of his convictions, he could face any challenge that arose. The night went on with laughter, stories, and shared dreams, and as Jake prepared for bed, his heart was full of hope and determination. Tomorrow would be a new day, with new battles to fight and new victories to achieve. But for now, he allowed himself to enjoy this moment of triumph, knowing it was just one more step in his journey of personal and community transformation. Jake's Digital Inclusion Project had exceeded all expectations. What began as a local initiative was now capturing national and international attention. Journalists from all over the country were arriving in the neighborhood to document the transformation, and delegations from other states and neighboring countries were coming to learn from his model. One morning, as Jake was supervising the installation of new equipment at the community center, he received a call that would change the course of his life once again. "Jake, this is Emily Parker from the Department of Social Development," said a voice on the other end of the line. "We've been following your project with great interest. We'd like you to come to Washington to discuss the possibility of implementing it nationwide." Jake's heart skipped a beat. It was an incredible opportunity, but it also meant another big change in his life. That night, he shared the news with his family during dinner. "That's wonderful, son," Linda exclaimed, her eyes shining with pride. Sarah, however, looked worried. "Does this mean you'll leave again?" Jake sighed. "I don't know, Sarah. It's a great opportunity to help more communities, but your heart is here," Linda completed, understanding her son's dilemma. The following days were a whirlwind of emotions and preparations. Jake met with community leaders, ensuring that the local project would continue to run smoothly in his absence. He also spent long hours with John, his mentor, discussing the pros and cons of accepting this new responsibility. "It's your decision, kid," John said. "But remember, sometimes we have to step away to make a bigger impact." The day before his trip to Washington, Jake decided to take a walk around the neighborhood. Every corner, every familiar face reminded him of why he had started all this. He stopped in front of the school where he once dreamed of a better future, now equipped with a modern computer room thanks to his project. Suddenly, he heard a familiar voice. "Jake! Jake!" It was Mike, his old friend, running towards him with a smile from ear to ear. "I did it!" Mike exclaimed, almost out of breath. "I got accepted into college. I'm going to study computer engineering." Jake hugged him, feeling a mixture of joy and nostalgia. "That's incredible, Mike. I'm so proud of you." "It's all thanks to you and the project," Mike said. "You opened my eyes to a world of possibilities." Those words resonated with Jake all the way back home. He realized that his work here, in his community, had planted seeds that would continue to grow even in his absence. When he arrived in Washington the next day, Jake felt overwhelmed by the frantic pace and imposing government buildings. The meeting with Emily Parker and other officials was intense. He presented his project, answered questions, and defended the importance of a community approach in implementing technology. "We're impressed." "Jake," Emily said at the end of the meeting, "we want you to lead the national expansion of the program, but we'd need you to move to Washington and travel constantly around the country." Jake felt a knot in his stomach. It was an incredible opportunity, but it meant another separation from his home and family. "I need time to think about it," he responded honestly. That night, in the solitude of his hotel room, Jake called home. Linda's voice on the other end of the line was a balm for his restless soul. "Mom, I don't know what to do," he confessed. "It's an incredible opportunity, but I feel like I'd be abandoning everything again." Linda was silent for a moment before responding. "My son, Remember what I've always told you. Roots are to nourish you, not to tie you down. You've done so much for our community. Maybe now is the time to share that gift with others." His mother's words, as always, were the guidance he needed. The next morning, Jake met with Emily Parker again. "I accept the position," he said with determination. "But on one condition. I want our community to be the training center for the national program. That way I can stay connected to my roots while we help others." Emily smiled, impressed by Jake's vision and commitment. "I think that's an excellent idea. Welcome aboard." The following months were an emotional roller coaster and full of challenges. Jake divided his time between Washington, where he worked on program planning and policy, and his community, which had become a national model for digital inclusion. Seeing young people from all over the country coming to his neighborhood to learn, exchange ideas, and take knowledge back to their own communities filled Jake with indescribable pride. Every time he saw a new group leave, loaded with enthusiasm and plans, he felt he was fulfilling a greater purpose. However, success also brought new challenges. The pressure of his new position, constant travel, and media attention began to take their toll. Jake found himself struggling against exhaustion and the feeling of losing connection with what really mattered. One afternoon, while supervising a workshop at the community center, Jake noticed a young woman who seemed particularly frustrated with her computer. He approached to help her. "Problems with the program?" he asked kindly. The young woman looked up, her eyes full of determination despite her frustration. I want to learn quickly. My community needs this and I feel like I'm not advancing fast enough." Jake sat next to her, recognizing in her words the same fire that once drove him. "What's your name?" "Lucy," she replied. "Well, Lucy, let me tell you a story," Jake began. And so, while explaining step by step how to use the program, he told her his own journey, from carrying bricks to leading a national program. By the end, Lucy was looking at him with a mixture of admiration and renewed determination. "Thank you, Jake. Not just for the technical help, but for reminding me why I'm here." That interaction was a moment of clarity for Jake. He realized that, amid high-level meetings and policy decisions, he had been losing sight of what was most important, the direct impact on people's lives. That night, as he walked back home, Jake made a decision. He called Emily Parker. "Emily, I need to make some changes in my role," he said. "I want to spend more time in the field, working directly with communities. We can designate someone else for the administrative tasks in Washington." There was a moment of silence before Emily responded. "You know, Jake, I was hoping you'd say something like that. You've done an incredible job. But we've all noticed that your true passion is in direct work with people. Let's do it." With this new arrangement, Jake found a balance he had been seeking. He divided his time between his native community, where he continued to be a source of inspiration and guidance, and other communities across the country, where he helped implement and adapt the program to local needs. This new approach not only revitalized the program, but also rekindled Jake's passion. Each new community, each transformed life, reminded him why he had started this journey in the first place. One night, while having dinner with his family after returning from a long trip, Jake looked around with a new appreciation. His mother, now running her own online business, Sarah, about to graduate as an engineer, and himself, finally finding a balance between his roots and his wings. "You know something, Mom," Jake said, taking Linda's hand. "I think I finally understood what you told me a long time ago. My roots have nourished me to be able to fly, but they always bring me back home." Linda smiled, her eyes shining with pride and love. "And we'll always be here, my boy, celebrating each of your flights and welcoming you back every time you return." As the night progressed, full of laughter and plans for the future, Jake realized that he had found his true purpose. It wasn't just about technology or progress, but about building bridges between communities, between generations, between dreams and realities. And so, with a heart full of gratitude and determination, Jake prepared for the next chapter of his life, knowing that each challenge, each triumph, brought him closer to the version of himself he had always dreamed of being. The digital inclusion program led by Jake had become a national phenomenon. Communities across the United States were experiencing transformations similar to those his hometown neighborhood had experienced. However, success brought new challenges and difficult decisions. One sunny morning, while Jake was supervising the installation of a new technology center in a remote town in Montana, he received an unexpected call. "Jake Rodriguez?" asked a voice with a foreign accent. "Yes, that's me," Jake replied, intrigued. "This is Thomas Weber from the Global Foundation for Technological Development. We've been following your work in the United States and we're impressed. We'd like to offer you a position as director of our projects in Latin America." Jake was left breathless. It was an opportunity he hadn't even dared to dream of. The foundation was known for its innovative work throughout the developing world. It's an honor," Jake stammered. "Can I have a few days to think about it?" "Of course," Thomas replied. "But you should know that the position would require you to move to our headquarters in Silicon Valley." Those words fell like a weight on Jake. Silicon Valley. Returning to the place where he had taken his first steps in the world of technology, but this time in a position of global leadership. It was tempting, but it meant leaving behind everything he had built in the United States. The following days were a whirlwind of emotions and reflections. Jake shared the news with his family and his closest colleagues, seeking advice and clarity. "It's an incredible opportunity, son," Linda said, with a mixture of pride and sadness in her voice. "But the decision is yours. Your heart will know what to do." Sarah, now a promising engineer working on the program, had a different opinion. "Jake, you've done so much here. Do you really want to leave everything and start over?" The opinion that surprised Jake the most came from Alex, his former boss and mentor. "Jake, when I first hired you, I saw potential in you that went beyond our company, or even the United States," Alex said during a video call. "Maybe this is the next step in your path." Confused and seeking clarity, Jake decided to take an impromptu trip through the communities he had helped. He wanted to see firsthand the impact of his work and, perhaps, find the answer he was looking for. His first stop was in a small town in New Mexico, where the local technology center had become a hub of innovation for sustainable agriculture. There he met Maria, a young farmer who now used drones and data analysis to improve her crops. "Jake, before you came with your computers, we thought technology wasn't for people like us," Maria said. "Now we're leading the agricultural revolution in our region." In Kentucky, he visited an artisan cooperative that had expanded its market globally thanks to e-commerce. The leader of the cooperative, Mr. Johnson, hugged him with tears in his eyes. "You gave us more than machines, Jake," the old man said. "You gave us hope and a future for our children." Each stop on his journey reaffirmed the profound impact the program had had, but it also showed Jake that the work was far from over. There were still so many communities to reach, so many lives to transform. The last stop on his journey was his own neighborhood. Walking through the streets that saw him grow, Jake marveled at the changes. The old vacant lot was now a technology park where young entrepreneurs developed their ideas. The school where he once dreamed of a better future was now a center of excellence in digital education. As he watched a group of children programming robots at the community center, Jake felt a hand on his shoulder. It was Mike, his old friend, now director of the center. "You look thoughtful," Mike said. "Got trouble in paradise?" Jake smiled weakly and shared with his friend the offer he had received. Mike listened attentively before responding. "You know, when you first left for Silicon Valley, I felt like you were abandoning us," Mike confessed. "But then you came back and transformed not only your life but ours too. Now I understand that sometimes you have to leave to be able to do more for those you love." Those words resonated deeply with Jake. He remembered how his first trip to Silicon Valley had prepared him to make a real difference in his community. Could this new opportunity allow him to do the same, but on an even larger scale? That night, sitting in the backyard of his mother's house, Jake made his decision. He called Thomas Weber. "I accept the position," he said firmly. "But I have some conditions." In the following days, Jake worked tirelessly on a transition plan. He didn't want to simply abandon the program he had built with so much effort. Instead, he proposed a shared leadership structure, with Sarah and Mike taking on key roles. The news of his departure was received with mixed emotions. There were tears and hugs, but also a general sense of pride and hope. Jake wasn't leaving. He was taking the vision and values of his community to a global platform. The day of his departure came too soon. At the airport, surrounded by his family and friends, Jake felt a déjà vu of his first departure to Silicon Valley, but this time, he wasn't a scared young man looking for his way. He was a confident leader, ready to face new challenges. "Remember, son," Linda said, hugging him tightly, "no matter how far you fly, you'll always have a home here." Sarah, with tears in her eyes but a determined smile, added, "Go and conquer the world, brother. We'll take care of everything here." As the plane took off, Jake looked out the window, watching his city grow smaller and smaller. But instead of feeling like he was leaving something behind, he felt like he was taking a part of his home and community with him. In his pocket, he carried a USB drive with photos and videos of all the lives he had touched. It was his reminder, his anchor, his motivation, because he knew that every decision he would make in his new role, every project he would lead, would be inspired by the lessons learned on the streets of his neighborhood and in the faces of those he had helped. As the plane rose above the clouds, Jake closed his eyes, allowing himself to dream about the possibilities that lay ahead. It wasn't the end of his story, but the beginning of a new chapter, a chapter in which he would carry the voice and hopes of his community to a global stage, connecting cultures, ideas, and dreams through technology and compassion. With his heart full of gratitude for his past and excitement for his future, Jake prepared for his next big adventure, knowing that no matter where life took him, he would always carry with him the spirit and strength of his community. The glass and steel skyscraper that housed the headquarters of the Global Foundation for Technological Development in Silicon Valley was a world apart from the dusty streets of Jake's neighborhood in Detroit. However, as he walked through the gleaming hallways on his first day as Director of Projects for Latin America, Jake carried with him the strength and values of his community. The first months were a whirlwind of meetings, presentations, and travel. Jake immersed himself in his new role with the same passion and dedication that had always characterized him. But he soon discovered that the world of international organizations was very different from the community work he had done in the United States. One morning, during a strategy meeting, Jake presented a proposal for a project in a rural community in Colombia. "We need to involve local leaders from the beginning," he argued passionately. "We can't just arrive and impose our vision." Thomas Weber, the CEO who had hired him, looked at him with a mixture of admiration and concern. "Jake, I understand your approach, but our donors expect quick results. We don't have time for slow community processes." Those words resonated with Jake like an alarm. Was this the kind of organization he wanted to work with? Was he betraying his principles by accepting this approach? That night, in the solitude of his apartment overlooking San Francisco Bay, Jake called home. Linda's voice on the other end of the line was a balm for his restless soul. "Mum, sometimes I feel like I'm losing my way," he confessed. "Everything is so different here." Linda was silent for a moment before responding, "Son, remember why you're there. You didn't go to adapt to them, but to teach them a new way of doing things." Inspired by his mother's words, Jake decided to stay true to his principles. In the following weeks, he worked tirelessly on a new implementation model that combined the efficiency the donors were looking for with the community approach he believed in. His big break came when the foundation decided to launch a pilot project in Brazil. Jake traveled to a favela in Rio de Janeiro, where he encountered a reality that reminded him very much of his own neighborhood. There he met Fernanda, a young community leader with fire in her eyes and determination in her voice. "We don't want charity," she told him in their first meeting. "We want real opportunities." Jake smiled, recognizing in Fernanda the same spirit that once drove him. "I'm not here to give charity," he replied. "I'm here to work with you and your community to create something that really serves you." Over the next few weeks, Jake and his team worked side by side with local leaders. They adapted technologies, developed training programs, and most importantly, listened to the needs and dreams of the community. The result was astonishing. In 6 months, the favela had transformed. Young people who previously had no prospects were now running tech startups. Single mothers had found new sources of income through e-commerce. The school dropout rate had dropped dramatically, thanks to innovative educational programs. The success of the project in Brazil did not go unnoticed. Soon, Jake found himself presenting his model at international conferences and advising governments throughout the developing world. However, with success also came new challenges. The demand for his time and expertise was overwhelming. Jake found himself traveling constantly, jumping from one continent to another, from one time zone to another. One night, while waiting for a flight at Dubai Airport, Jake received a video call from Sarah. "Jake, you have to come back home," his sister exclaimed, with a mixture of excitement and urgency in her voice. "The government wants to implement our model across the entire country." The news took him by surprise. The project he had started in his small neighborhood was now going to become national policy. It was a dream come true, but Jake realized he was half a world away, unable to be directly part of this historic moment. That realization was a turning point for Jake. He realized that in his eagerness to make a global impact, he ran the risk of losing connection with the roots that had brought him this far. With renewed determination, Jake began to restructure his work at the foundation. He proposed the creation of a team of regional leaders, each rooted in their own community, but connected globally. He would act as a bridge, bringing best practices from one place to another, but always maintaining a close connection to the ground. Thomas Weber, initially skeptical, was impressed by the results. "Jake, you've changed the way we view technological development," he told him in a meeting. "Your approach is not only more effective, but also more ethical." With this new model in place, Jake was able to return to the United States for the implementation of the national program. He was received as a hero, not only in his neighborhood, but throughout the country. In an emotional ceremony at the White House, Jake watched as his mother, Linda, cut the inaugural ribbon of the new National Center for Digital Innovation, a project that would bring technological opportunities to every corner of the country. "This is just the beginning," Jake said in his speech. "The real digital revolution is not about machines or codes. It's about empowering people, giving them the tools to write their own success stories." That night, as he dined with his family at the same table where he once dreamed of a better future, Jake reflected on his journey. From a young man carrying bricks to a global leader in technological development, every step had been guided by love for his community and the desire to make a difference. "You know something, Mum," he said, taking Linda's hand. "I think I finally understood what true success means. It's not about titles or recognition. It's about creating opportunities for others to shine." Linda smiled, her eyes shining with pride and love. "You always knew it, my boy. You just needed to go around the world to confirm it." As the night progressed, filled with laughter and plans for the future, Jake realized he had found his perfect balance. With one foot on the global stage and the other firmly planted in his roots, he was ready to face any challenge the future might bring. And so, with a heart full of gratitude and a mind full of ideas, Jake prepared for the next chapter of his life. A chapter that promised not only to transform his country, but to inspire a new generation of leaders throughout the developing world. Because now he understood that every life touched, every community transformed, was one more step towards a more equitable and connected world. 5 years had passed since the Digital Inclusion Program became national policy in the United States. Jake Dow, now 35, found himself at a familiar crossroads. His work had taken him around the world, from the favelas of Brazil to remote villages in India, always carrying with him the vision of people-centered technological development. One autumn afternoon, as he walked through the streets of his old neighborhood, now unrecognizable with its innovation centers and local startups, Jake received a call that would change the course of his life once again. "Jake, this is Emily Parker," said the voice on the other end of the line. "The president wants to see you. They're considering your name for the new position of Secretary of Innovation and Technological Development." The world seemed to stop for a moment. Jake sat on a bench in the park he had helped build years ago, trying to process the news. That night, during the family dinner, he shared the news with Linda, Sarah, and Mike, who had become part of the family. "Secretary," Sarah exclaimed, with a mixture of pride and concern. "Jake, that's amazing, but are you sure you want to enter politics?" Linda, always the voice of wisdom, added, "Son, Whatever your decision, remember why you started all this. Jake spent the following days in deep reflection. He visited the various projects he had initiated, talked with community leaders, and met with his team at the Global Foundation. One afternoon, while helping in a programming workshop for children at the community center, a 10-year-old girl approached him. "Mr. Jake," she said shyly, "is it true that you grew up here, that you were like us?" Jake knelt down to be at her level. "That's right. I grew up on these same streets, dreaming of a better future." The girl smiled broadly. "Then I can be like you when I grow up. I can change the world." Those words were the clarity Jake needed. He realized that his true legacy wasn't in titles or positions, but in the inspiration and opportunities he could create for others. The next day, Jake met with the president. To everyone's surprise, he declined the offer of the cabinet position. "Mr. President," he explained, "I believe I can do more for our country by continuing my work from the grassroots. But I have a proposal." Jake presented his vision of a National Innovation Council, a body that would bring together community leaders, tech entrepreneurs, and government officials to guide the country's technological development policies. "We need an approach that combines vision from above with wisdom from below," Jake argued. "Only then can we create solutions that truly work for everyone." The president, impressed by Jake's passion and vision, accepted the proposal. In the months that followed, the National Innovation Council became a reality, with Jake as its main coordinator. This new role allowed Jake to combine the best of both worlds. He could influence national policies while continuing to work directly with communities. The American model of inclusive technological development soon became an example for other developing countries. But Jake's true triumph wasn't in international recognition or economic growth statistics. It was in the transformed lives, in dreams come true. One afternoon, while walking through his old neighborhood with Linda, they stopped in front of the house where they had lived so many years ago. The house was still there, but now it was surrounded by a prosperous and lively neighborhood. "Remember when you asked me if I was sure I wanted to change the world?" Jake asked his mother. Linda smiled, her eyes shining with tears of pride. "I remember it like it was yesterday. You were just a kid with big dreams. And you never stopped believing in me," Jake replied, hugging his mother. "All of this, everything we've achieved, started with you, Mom." As they walked back home, Jake reflected on his journey. From a young man carrying bricks to a global leader in technological innovation, every step had been guided by love for his community and the desire to make a difference. That night, at a dinner that brought together family, friends, and colleagues from all stages of his life, Jake stood up to make a toast. "Years ago, when I began this journey, I thought success meant escaping poverty," he said, his voice full of emotion. "But now I understand that true success is creating a world where no one has to escape, a world where every child, no matter where they're born, has the opportunity to reach their potential." He looked around at the smiling and emotional faces. He saw Sarah, now a successful engineer leading her own team on the Innovation Council, Mike, directing a network of community technology centers across the country. Brilliant young people from his neighborhood who were now creating technologies that competed globally. "This isn't my achievement," Jake continued. "It's our achievement. Each of you has been part of this story, and together we'll continue to write even more incredible chapters." As the night progressed, filled with laughter, stories, and shared dreams, Jake realized that he had found something more valuable than personal success. He had found a purpose, a way to connect his past with his present and his future. In the years that followed, Jake continued his work, always looking for new ways to use technology to empower marginalized communities. He traveled the world, sharing the American model and learning from other cultures. He wrote books, gave inspiring talks, and mentored a new generation of technology leaders with social conscience. But no matter how far his travels took him, or how many recognitions he received, Jake never forgot where he came from. Every week, without fail, he returned to his old neighborhood to teach at the community center, keeping alive the connection to his roots. And so, the boy who once dreamed of changing the world from the dusty streets of a poor neighborhood became a beacon of hope and a catalyst for change for millions. His story, a testimony to the power of dreams, perseverance, and love for community, would continue to inspire future generations to believe in the transformative power of technology and compassion. As the sun set over the city that saw him born and grow, Jake looked towards the horizon, smiling at the infinite possibilities that the future still held, because he knew that every ending is just the beginning of a new adventure, and that true legacy is built not in monuments or titles, but in the lives touched and the dreams inspired.